Deion Sanders has a lot to prove in 2024, or does he?
You are Locked On Buffs, your daily podcast on the Colorado Buffaloes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Buffs. I am your host, Kevin Borba. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today, and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn. We're also brought to you by the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day for free and available wherever you get your podcast. Joining me today is Mr. David Talks Buffs himself. We're going to be talking all things Buffs, David, so I appreciate you for joining me and hopping on.
Absolutely, Kevin. It's great to debut on the show. Appreciative of everything that you're doing and happy that we can have a chat.
Yeah, some people appreciate it. Some people think I'm a little harsh. We'll find out at the end of the day, I guess. Today we're talking about if Coach Prime and Colorado need to prove themselves. I saw recent discussions about the Buffs. Their win total, if you guys didn't know, is at 5.5, which means they have to win 6 games to reach the over, which would be a bowl game, which would be a step up from 4-8 this past season. And some people are saying that maybe Coach Prime is cashing some checks that he can't really, or his mouth is cashing some checks that he can't keep up with by making playoff declarations. So as someone who's around Colorado and you follow the program very closely, David, do they have to prove anything to anyone in 2024? And if they do have to prove something, what is that?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. I think that you'll see quite a wide variety of what people feel like Coach Prime and the Buffs have to prove this year. I think, hey, this past year, of course, a lot of us had really exciting expectations after 3-0. But hey, if you followed this team, these are kind of the starts that we get. And so this type of 4-8 season that we saw with the Buffs, it's kind of typical for what we've seen over the last maybe 15 years or so. So it wasn't that different. I just want to get out of the way real quick. Like, if people are looking at last year as a failure, I don't see it like that. I don't see it as a massive success either, but I don't think that it was a failure, maybe like some people wanted to point out. We did have a 3-game improvement this past year, but Coach Prime has said this is the season of expectation, and I would say that the expectation myself is that we're getting to a bowl game. We are getting a 7 wins plus type of season from the team this year. I mean, we haven't had a winning season since 2016. Like, it is time to put the pieces together. And I think there's a lot of, whether you see these as valid excuses or reasons for why the team kind of fell apart, when you're bringing in, 70, 80 new guys, overhauling the new roster, new coaching staff hires at every single position, not everything's going to look perfectly, but now that you got a year under your belt, now that you got a time to bring in a second recruiting class, to decide if you're going to retain hires or bring in new guys, now those kinds of excuses or maybe leniencies for a first year, they go away. And my expectation this year is that we're going to see another jump. I want to see the Buffs legitimately contend. I want to see them not only be in the majority of these games, but win some of these close games. I mean, what do we have? Like 5 losses from like single digits or 1 score or less, something like that this past year. So I want to see another jump in terms of the wins that we're putting on the board. But I'm not going to go out just yet and say, those plus $30,000 odds on the national championship are something that we need to be definitely throwing 100 down very confident with. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think the championship odds, if you want to spend your money that way, go ahead. I'm not a gambling advisor. I never will pretend to be, but that's not how I personally would be throwing my money down. In terms of proving themselves, I feel like there is sort of this sense of like, there's like a realistic proof, and then there's like the proof that people listen to what Coach Prime says, where like I don't want to say he guaranteed, but he said they can make the playoff, or he said we're going to be in the playoff or something to that degree. I don't remember the exact wording, but he had Colorado in the playoff. And I'm not saying it's not possible, because obviously if you win the Big 12, you're in. It's come down to automatic bids in the playoff now. I think realistically, like if you look at college football and how things go, most teams don't go from 1-11 to 4-8 to all of a sudden they're in the college football playoff contending for a title.
Right.
We've also seen since 2011, no team has won the playoff or the championship without having like 50% of their roster be made up of 4 and 5 stars. So Colorado is not there yet. It wouldn't shock me if they do get there, because I think if you wanted to, you could put together a top 10 class at the snap of a finger. But I do think there is some sort of need for proof that they've improved. Obviously, you kind of not part ways with Sean Lewis unceremoniously, but it was kind of like a weird like breakup. It was like, okay, he's the best hire at the beginning of the season, and then by week 6, it's like, actually, we don't like him. He's not what we wanted, and it's like, okay, that's interesting, because by week 3 he was a candidate for the Michigan State job. And then it was like Charles Kelly, he's a Nick Saban guy, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, he doesn't know what he's doing. And it's like, okay, that's interesting. You bring in your own guys now. Pat Shurmur as someone who was on staff already in a different capacity and is already his guy. I think there is a longing to prove that they can make it to a bowl game. I think they need to prove that they can improve. They need to prove that they can not have the same mistakes that they had last year. Because it wasn't like outside of the Oregon game where they were completely outmatched. Every game they were pretty much in almost every game. And there was like discipline issues. There was like not knowing rules, where it was like substitutions on offense where they would sub guys on and off with like 5 seconds left or 10 seconds left. And then the defense would get a chance to sub and delay a game.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was just so many things where it's like, that can't happen this next year. Is there anything that stands out to you where it's like they need to prove this immediately?
Yeah, it's really funny because sometimes I feel like with this fan base, we can have a difficult time sometimes separating like what is coach speak or like coach's expectations versus what our expectations as like fans should be. And they can be different. And that's totally fine. Like I'm going to come out here and say, hey, I think the floor, or my hopeful floor for this team, is that we see at least another 3-win improvement this year. But, you know, if I had Coach Prime, or if I heard Coach Prime preaching that, like, guys, like, let's just get 3 more wins, I would be incredibly upset. You know, I don't want that. Yes, I want our coach to be setting the bar higher than anybody. Like, that's how it should be. But that doesn't mean we as fans should be taking on, you know, that same type of expectation for the team, when I feel like that might just be a little lofty right now. That's just how I feel about it. And I think that there are definitely some things to be excited about this year, but there are some things that we have to prove. Coach Prime has to prove that he's able to fix some mistakes that he made from this past year. I think he's learned now about the overtime rules and different things like that. I think that, hey, if you look at even the greatest coaches, you know, in the NFL, for instance, right? I mean, Bill Belichick has made some poor assistant hires before. If he can do it, if Andy Reid can do it, Coach Prime can do that too. So I'm not going to come out here and say that the man doesn't know how to hire or anything like that. But I do think that coming out of this past year and moving on from both coordinators, like, we want to see more of that continuity. We want to see more of the inconsistency issues ironed out. We want to see the discipline issues ironed out as well. I think that I like the fact that, hey, they keep some continuity from promoting Pat Shurmur from within. I think that the more continuity you can have over a long period of time really does lead to more sustainable long-term success. And yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens with Rob Livingston. He's kind of a wild card, right? I like the fact that, hey, he's a longtime NFL assistant, but this is his first time calling a defense. You know, we don't know how this whole thing's going to go, but I will say I do like the fact that the man was never fired from any of his jobs in the NFL. That's something that not a lot of coaches can say, right? And just because you're fired doesn't mean that you're a bad coach. So it's going to be very fascinating to see how this whole thing, you know, fleshes out. I think that, and I've tried to tell my viewers or tell my audiences is just like, Coach Prime is learning this at a new level, just like everybody else is. When, just because he's a Hall of Famer and got a gold jacket
Right.
doesn't mean that he's got everything figured out. So I think just like you've seen other coaches maybe take a couple years to kind of find how they want to do things, find their niche, be able to find the right hires, stuff like that. I'm willing to give Coach Prime that same luxury and probably a little bit longer of a leash as a Buffs fan, just because, he had no business taking this job. We are so lucky having somebody in here that's able to recruit that the way that he is, with us coming off of a 1-11 and now 4-8 season. I still feel like we're punching above our weight in the recruiting realm for how we finished this year. What do you think about that regarding the recruiting? I know you're doing the interviewing, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that.
I think so. In terms of who he's getting, I think it's a huge get. Like, all the recruits that he's getting are like major gets for Colorado. Obviously landing 5 stars of any sorts, but he's brought in, we'll count Travis Hunter, 3 5-stars in 2 years. And it's like, I don't even know if Colorado, I think they had a couple before. But I think they both ended up transferring elsewhere. And so it's one of those things where it's like, he's getting 5 stars and theoretically they're going to hit for him. And so he's getting the most out of them. He's bringing in attention. He's bringing in all of this attention from recruits that Colorado normally wouldn't get. If they hired, like, say, I feel like a popular name at the time was Tom Herman. Like, if they hired Tom Herman's a great recruiter. I followed him closely at Texas. He's probably not bringing in multiple 5 stars to Colorado. But now I will say, I think he should recruit the high school ranks a little bit more, because I feel like that's kind of where championship teams are developed and built. But obviously he has a method, and we'll see how his method progresses. But I also think the other thing that they need to prove before we move on is sort of like the adversity situation. They were like horrendous. As soon as they got punched in the mouth, it was like, okay, we're done. Like, this is over. Like, the Oregon game, you could quickly tell they were outmatched, and it didn't look like they showed a lot of fight. They lose that Stanford game, and I realistically think, while the Stanford game wasn't like the biggest loss in terms of like pain, or it could have been, depends on how you feel. But either way, I think the reason it sucks so bad is because it came right before the bye week. And so they had like 2 weeks to sit there and sulk on this like loss. And I think it just broke them mentally. And so I feel like they need to be mentally tougher heading into next season, which is another way they need to prove themselves. When we come back, we're going to be talking about our biggest spring ball concerns and positivities, battles, everything in between. But first, a word from our sponsors over at FanDuel. Get in on the NBA action. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Heck, you could even go look at that Colorado win total at 5.5, throwing a little money on there and see what happens. I think they hit that over. You tell me what you think. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel is the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Welcome back to Locked On Buffs. I appreciate you guys for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast. Joining me is David Talks Buffs. David, we are talking Buffs, and we're talking Buffs spring ball. On Monday's episode, I talked about the position battles that stood out to me. I didn't touch on concerns. What are concerns that stand out to you for this Colorado team as they start spring ball here pretty soon?
Yeah, good question. I think there are some position battles that I definitely have my eye on. Probably one of the positions that I've talked the most about, just feeling the most unsure. Maybe some people might feel a little bit more confident than I feel right now, is at the right tackle position. I do love the fact that we brought in Khalil Benson. And I do think Savion, he was playing on a bum ankle for the majority of that last year. I think prior to that injury, I think he was better than what he showed throughout the majority of the year. But I think regardless, those guys, they excel in some aspects of their game, but they also have some serious holes as well. And so that's going to be a position battle that I have my eye on, and hoping that Phil Oldholt can come in here and coach these guys up. I think that this past year we didn't really see any improvement throughout anybody on our line. More so, we saw regression, we saw loss of confidence, and I want to see this line improving. I want to see guys get better. I want to see them, attack with confidence. So that's one of the biggest things that I'm looking forward to is Savion becoming more aggressive in the run game? Is Khalil Benson working on some of his, lateral quickness and his hand movement to be a little bit more sure in the passing game? Those sorts of things. So that's one for the offensive side of the ball. And really, on the defensive side of the ball, there's still a big question mark for the interior line. Shocker, the lines are still kind of the biggest question marks, right? But I love the fact that we brought in Chidozie Nwankwo. I think he's far and above probably our best and most proven interior defensive line player right now. But outside of that, I mean, who starts alongside him? I don't know. Is Amari McNeil going to develop to that place to be a starter? Will he take another jump? We'll have to see. What about Anquin Barnes, guy coming in here that's 315 pounds from Alabama, but I think he might have only taken maybe 10 to 20 career snaps at Alabama or something like that. So he's a guy that we don't really know what he can do yet. We'll take a look at a guy like Tarian Carter, who I think might be right now my betting favorite to start alongside Chidozie Nwankwo. Had a really good year in 2021. Missed 2022 because of the ACL, and then last year he came back with kind of a regressive
I think we lost David there.
So maybe that has something to do with it, why you see a discrepancy in his production. But I think we'll probably be playing him in a similar way to where we saw him play at Arkansas this past year. So that's. And will we see a guy like Chaz Wallace take a leap? I'm not totally sure, but my hope is that on both of the lines that we can still target these position groups during the transfer portal. I think we've gotten better, but we're not anywhere near, I think, where everybody wants us to be.
I think those are some great points. And honestly, it's interesting because in the back of my head, I'm like my position battles that I talked about on yesterday's episode, I was like the offensive line. I'm like, they bring in 6 new guys. They have David Connor, who transferred in from Florida last year. And it's like, obviously, in theory, these guys are all going to come together and be good, but we don't know if they're going to be good. I would assume they are, even if they're average, that improves the team much more than they were last year. The defense line, I totally agree, because it's like they brought in bodies, they brought in big dudes. And I think sometimes, and I say this all the time on my show, I say, don't get caught up on the helmet of where they transferred from. Because last year you bring in a couple Alabama transfers, you bring in some Florida State transfers, and for the most part, some of those guys did not perform. As like there's a reason that guys are transferring. It's not always because they want more NIL money or whatever it may be. Sometimes they just were not cutting it at their previous program. And so I think Anquin Barnes, while I'm not saying he won't be good, I'm just saying we need to see him before we could be like, yep, he's a certified guy. And then my concerns, I look at the running back position and the linebacker position to mix it up from what David talked about. Running back, Alton McCaskill realistically hasn't played a meaningful game of football since I was in grad school. So 2021. So that was a while ago. I feel old, not to age myself, but that was a hot minute ago. He hasn't played a meaningful snap. Obviously he played a little bit, wasn't healthy. Nothing on him. He says he's healthy now, and we'll just have to wait and see. Dylan Edwards is undersized. I don't know if you want to rely on him to be an every down back all the time. I feel like that could get him possibly banged up. And then I look at the linebacker group, and I'm like, I see Levante Bentley. He lost a starting spot to Juwan Mitchell, who was with the team for 10 minutes. He lost his starting spot to a guy that was joined the team the week prior, earned it back. So good on him. But he's the most proven linebacker right now. And then I look around and it's is Demore Kennedy going to take a step? Is Brendan Gant going to take a step? Is Trevor Woods going to still be a linebacker? Is he going to be a safety or a hybrid? And I'm like, I think spring ball is going to be a time for Coach Prime to be like, okay, we need more guys out of the portal at these positions. What do you think?
Yeah, you bring up a great point about the linebacker position. That is something that they have just as many question marks as the interior defensive line. I mean, I'm excited about Jalen Wester coming out here.
Yes. I get a lot of hate for not hyping him up, but I feel like he's undersized.
Yeah, but he's about the same size as Trevor Woods and also coming up from the G5 level. So, I mean, again, I think Savion Washington, we were pumped about him coming out here, came up here from G5. Sometimes that transition isn't always as smooth initially as you're hoping it's going to be. I do think he makes our linebacker room better, but again, we don't have much. We don't have any proven power 4 guys coming in here right now. Hopefully we're able to get some. But I think if I was Coach Prime or, Coach Riz or, why am I forgetting Corey Phillips? That's right. Or if I'm Corey Phillips and I got to decide, hey, I got one scholarship spot, it's got to go to defensive line or linebacker. I think I would still prioritize the defensive line just because I feel like, just like with a good offensive line, your running backs will look better. Your linebackers will look better with good interior defensive linemen. But I think one other thing that you're getting me thinking about is how Robert Livingston has talked a little bit about positionless football. He feels like defense is kind of going in that direction where you have guys on the field that can do a multitude of different things. And so you can't always get a read on what the specific coverage is going to be. So, hey, we might see more of this kind of hybrid safety linebacker look a little bit more often than maybe some people are expecting. We'll have to see how he chooses to use, I think, some of our better athletes on defense, like Cameron Silman Craig or Jaden Milner-Jones is another guy that I think could take a step into having some more playing time. Miles Slusher. So it's going to be interesting to see how we use that linebacker position, but I wouldn't be shocked if a lot of these sets, we just have one traditional linebacker out there. We'll have to see.
Yeah, and then the thing that worries me about that, though, is like in the Big 12, you look at Utah, they have a stable running backs. Texas Tech returns a really good running back. UCF, same thing. Kansas, same thing. It's like, it's cool to have all these athletes everywhere. It really is, because it's like, oh, we have like 5 Isaiah Simmonses on the field. But then what happens when they're like, okay, we're just going to get in the power eye and run the ball down your throats and make them tackle? Like, does that work out? And so, yeah, you bring up the linebackers, or you bring up the defense line, I bring up the linebackers, and I'm like, if I had to pick, that's like a real Sophie's choice, because it's like they both need an extra spot, but like I don't know who I'd give it to. So that's really interesting. I'm glad you brought that up. And then also, this is underrated. I don't think it's a really big deal until it is. But the backup quarterback spot, I feel like Ryan Staub should have the edge. But does Walter Taylor or Destin Wade, the Wade twins have been throwing me off. The names are killing me. Destin Wade, does he do one of them kind of supplant themselves as the second guy? Do they help out in the run game? Because I know both Taylor and Wade are athletes that can kind of contribute otherwise. So there's a lot of things to look out for in spring ball. When we come back, we're going to be talking about our looking ahead. We're going to be talking about record predictions, what worries us about the schedule. But first, a word from our sponsors over at Gametime. Buying tickets is always stressful, or at least it shouldn't be. Gametime is a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports and music, comedy, and theater events near you. And right now, all users, you can take the stress off and get $100 off when you buy a big game ticket with code Vegas100. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. They have last-minute tickets, flash deals, zone deals, and it's easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area. You get to see your seat, which is the best part in my opinion, because at some stadiums they have like these random seats where you're covered by a pole or you're covered by like a weird curve in the stadium. That never happens on Gametime because you can always see where you're sitting. They have tickets right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it starts if you decide too late that you want to go. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Right now, all Gametime users get $100 off a big game ticket with code Vegas100. Terms apply. Just download the Gametime app and use code Vegas100. That's VEGAS 100 for $100 off a big game ticket. Or if you're not going to the game, use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to Locked On Buffs. Appreciate you guys for tuning in and making me your first listen of the day. We're looking ahead. We're predicting the future as it's so easy. Everyone does it. Me and David Talks Buffs are going to be looking ahead at Colorado's schedule. Give me your initial thoughts on this Big 12 schedule. It's like, I don't want to say it's their first Big 12 schedule because they were in the Big 12 already, but it's their first new era Big 12 schedule. Very different conference.
Man, it's There's a lot of debate on if this conference schedule is more difficult than this one that we saw this past year.
Mm,
I don't know about that, but when you're comparing to what the other predicted like top teams in the conference got, man, I don't feel like we got many gimmies on this conference schedule. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, I think we play like all 5 of the teams that were ranked last year in the conference. I know that there's
yep.
changes and turnover, coaches going other places, but that's never great to see if you're trying to find the most wins possible. But
Right.
yeah, I am hoping that the Buffs are can get themselves into contention. But we got some interesting games. Of course, Kansas State, those are going to be some really hard games. I think Kansas State might be our toughest game at home. If I remember, it's at home. But I'm just thankful, Kevin, that we don't have to start off conference play going against somebody like Oregon. Thank God we can kind of warm up to conference play a little bit with Baylor. But I don't think we should be taking anybody lightly in this conference. What do you think?
Yeah, I look at the schedule, and then when it first came out, I honestly thought Colorado it sets them up to start off hot, is how I view it. Like, I realistically look at those first 5 games. I have the schedule in front of me. They have North Dakota State, which I'm not saying any of these games are easy. I'm not saying they're going to win by 30 in any of these games. It wouldn't shock me if they won every game by 7. But they have North Dakota State, Nebraska at Lincoln, which will be a tough environment, at Colorado State, another tough environment, then Baylor, and then UCF. And I look at those games, I'm like, okay, I could see them going 5-0. I could see them going 4-1, or even 3-2, which would be solid.
Yeah.
And then it automatically goes into Kansas State, Arizona, which is like 2 top 25 teams, possibly 2 top 15 teams. Then they get Cincinnati, which is very reminiscent of that Stanford game right before bye week, because Cincinnati is one of the worst teams in college football. And then it's all of a sudden, it's like Texas Tech, which is probably a dark horse next year. I'm calling it right now. Wouldn't shock me if they're playing for a Big 12 title. Utah, who is the projected favorite to win the conference. Kansas, another team that could play for a Big 12 title. Oklahoma State, who did play for a Big 12 title this past season. So it's like, I think it sets them up to start really hot. And then I think it sets them up to kind of like maybe finish 1-6 or 1-5 at the end of the year.
Yeah, I think with what you were talking about to start the show, that resiliency, that mental toughness, it's going to be really important to see that this team can bounce back at later points in the year rather than just having kind of that snowball effect lead them towards like what people would say. Yeah, I mean, would be a disappointing finish. I mean, if we're finishing off on another, what do we lose, like 6 straight to end the year, something like that.
8 of the last 9.
We can't have that. We no doubt can have that. But I think one thing that is nice about this conference is that right now there isn't any team like Oregon, like a top 5 team that we're going up against right now in the conference. I feel like we should be in all of these games. Am I predicting us to go 12-0 or anything like that? No. But I do want to see us. I mean, it would be great to squeak a couple wins out against some of these teams that I would imagine that we're not going to be favored going against.
Yeah, and I think you're going to agree with my next statement. I think we talked about proving yourself earlier, and the best way to prove yourself is those one-score games. Be on the right side of them this year. They took Arizona down to the wire. I wouldn't say they took USC down to the wire because there was a lot of game management errors, but it was a one-score game. Like, they had moments in multiple games where it's like, you don't do this one thing. You don't miss a kick. You have a certain call go your way against Utah where it's like a touchdown was overturned, but like, you can't blame the refs. But there's other plays where it's like, if this goes a different way, Colorado wins 7-8 games this past year if certain things go their way. So just make sure you're not taking yourself out of the games is what I would say. Is there any game in particular that you would circle on your schedule?
Well, I mean, yeah, there are a few. And I guess I'll cover kind of the non-conference a little bit because obviously Nebraska and Colorado State, these are going to be really important games for us. Nebraska, I think, is a substantially improved team. Just like I would say that we're a substantially improved team too. I think these rebuilds are kind of along the same trajectory. And so it's going to be fun to see how this team performs on the road in an environment like in Lincoln. I think Nebraska makes a bowl game last year if they have at least a half decent quarterback. And so Dylan Raiola, like, hopefully we can take advantage of him, like having his second start in his college football career. And to take advantage of a really talented quarterback, but not a very experienced one yet. So that's going to be a huge game, I think, just to kind of see where we're at. Of course, this was a blowout this past year, but and I loved it. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely loved it. But that's probably a much closer game if they have somebody other than Jeff Sims fumbling the ball, throwing interceptions, like all that. Like, Nebraska's a better team than what they showed that week. I think so. And then, but when it comes to Colorado State, this is a game where I don't think we're taking them lightly at all. They've made it personal. I mean, you see all the chit chat going on Twitter, all the trash talk. You saw what Coach Norvell's wife said about Shador, all those things. I think this team, compared to this past year where I think they were totally overlooking Colorado State with everything else that they had going on, that's not going to happen this year. Nor am I worried, guys, about this game being on the road. We're going to take over that stadium up in Fort Collins, an hour up the road. Not worried about it at all. It's going to have a home environment, but that Nebraska game, it's going to be huge. And I think it's going to be a great test of character for this team. And we're going to get a pretty good idea very quickly how much improved this team really is. And then the other one that I'm going to look at is like how we play. This might seem like an underrated game in a sense, but how we play against Texas Tech in Lubbock. Lubbock is just one of those tough environments for opposing teams. I mean, you saw Oregon struggle with them last year, almost lose a game to them on the road. And yeah, it's a tough place to play. The environments in the Big 12 are a lot tougher, in my opinion, than a lot of the places where we played in the Pac. So yeah, it's nothing's going to come easy on the road here. What say you?
Yeah, I think the Big 12, before we go, I'll end it on this. I think the Big 12 has a lot of stadiums where it's like you don't realize how hyped they get. Oklahoma State, it is like they're on top of you. I think the sidelines are about like 10 yards wide. So like the fans are like literally right behind you. They have the paddles where they're hitting the mats the whole time. UCF is called the bounce house because it is literally so crazy. Like, they get wild up there. All these Big 12 teams are very passionate. I think everyone's tired of being called the truck stop conference or whatever it may be. Rice Eccles at Utah is very loud. Yes. So Colorado has no easy task in the Big 12 in year one. I do think me and Dave, I'll speak for both of us right here. We're calling for an improvement. We're calling for a step up from Colorado. David, before we go, first of all, I want to thank you for joining us, and make sure to go check out David Talks Buffs on all of his social platforms. But I need a quick record prediction. Way too early record prediction.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to preface this. This is with my heart, okay? I'm a natural optimist. So for a lot of these 50-50 games, I have us winning. I'm going 9-3, baby. I want to see a 5-game improvement. But again, like we said, Kevin, I think the floor and expectation should be another at least 3 wins. So as long as we're hitting that 7-game win mark, I'm going to be extremely happy. But is it hard for me to pick against us, or against Nebraska, or maybe against Texas Tech, something like that, UCF? For some of those toss-ups, I'm giving it to the Buffs right now.
Okay, I like it. Make sure to check David Talks Buffs out on all platforms: YouTube, Twitter. Maybe Threads. You on Threads, David?
I need to get on Threads.
The man is everywhere. He'll be everywhere. And I appreciate him for joining the show. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. I will see you guys tomorrow. Hope you guys have a great day.